The night of the 24th of July, 1943, 791 bombers fly east across the North Sea toward Hamburg. In each aircraft, beside the flare chute, sit packages weighing exactly 1 pound each. Inside every package, 2,000 strips of black paper, each one coated with a hair-thin layer of aluminium foil. 27 centimeters long, 2 centimeters wide. They look like nothing, they weigh almost nothing, and they cost almost nothing. But in about 40 minutes, they will blind the most advanced air defense system on the planet. But we'll get to that. By 1943, flying a bomber over Germany had become the most dangerous job in the Allied war effort. The numbers told the story. For every 100 bombers that crossed the German coast at night, 4 or 5 would not come back. That sounds survivable until you do the math. At 5% losses per raid, a bomber crew's life expectancy was 20 missions. Most were assigned 30. The men who climbed into those aircraft every night understood exactly what those numbers meant. They flew anyway. The reason they kept dying was radar. The Germans had built a killing machine called the Kammhuber Line. It divided the sky over Western Europe into a grid of defensive boxes. Each box contained a Wurzburg radar that could track a single bomber to within a few dozen meters. Ground controllers watched the screens and guided night fighters directly onto target. A dedicated fighter, usually a Messerschmitt Bf 110 or Junkers Ju 88, would be vectored in with such precision that the pilot often made visual contact within seconds. The bomber crew never saw it coming. One moment, silence. The next, cannon shells through the fuselage. 7 men dead before anyone could reach for the intercom. The system was methodical, precise, and devastatingly effective. Bomber Command was bleeding to death, night after night, 1 crew at a time, 7 men per aircraft, multiplied by 40 or 50 aircraft per raid. The training system couldn't replace them fast enough. Entire squadrons were being consumed in weeks. Everything depended on radar. If radar worked, bombers died. If radar could be defeated, bombers lived. But how do you defeat radar? The answer had been sitting on a desk at the Telecommunications Research Establishment since 1942. A Welsh physicist named Joan Curran had figured it out. The principle was embarrassingly simple. Radar works by sending out a radio pulse and listening for the echo that bounces back from objects in its path. Any piece of metal cut to the right length will reflect radar energy. Specifically, a strip of metal cut to exactly half the wavelength of the radar signal will resonate with it, bouncing back an echo that looks identical to a full-sized aircraft. One strip, 1 ghost aircraft on the radar screen. 1,000 strips, 1,000 ghost aircraft. Curran experimented at home, cutting strips of aluminium foil with household scissors. She tested different sizes, different materials, different backings. She settled on strips of black paper coated with aluminium, precisely 27 centimeters long, matching the wavelength of the Wurzburg radar. The paper backing reduced the weight and helped the strips tumble slowly through the air rather than dropping like stones, prolonging the deception. She bundled them into 1-pound packets of 2,000 strips each. Then she arranged a test. An aircraft dropped the strips over the English countryside while observers watched the radar screens below. The result was, in her colleagues' words, truly amazing. The radar showed what appeared to be an enormous fleet of aircraft where nothing existed. Every strip was a phantom bomber. Every bundle was a phantom squadron. The device was codenamed Window. It worked perfectly. It was ready for deployment by mid-1942. And then nothing happened. For over a year. The problem wasn't technical. Window worked beautifully. The problem was terror. Window was so simple that any engineer could copy it in an afternoon. Aluminium foil, paper, and scissors. That's all it took. If Britain used Window over Germany, the Germans would pick up the strips from the ground, understand the principle immediately, and begin dropping their own version over England within weeks. And Britain's entire defense, the radar network that had won the Battle of Britain, the system that detected incoming raids and guided night fighters to intercept them, would be just as blind as the German system. Professor Lindemann, Churchill's chief scientific advisor, argued furiously against using it. The risk was too great. Britain had far more to lose from blinding radar than Germany did. Bomber Command argued just as furiously for it. Crews were dying every night. Window could save hundreds of lives immediately. Every week of delay was measured in dead young men. The debate raged for months. Scientists against commanders, defense against offense, caution against desperation. Then R.V. Jones, Britain's top scientific intelligence officer, discovered something extraordinary. The Germans had independently invented the exact same thing. They called it Duple, named after the Berlin suburb where it was tested. And Goering had suppressed it for exactly the same reason the British were suppressing Window. He was terrified the Allies would copy it and use it against Germany. Both sides had the weapon. Both sides were too afraid to use it first. Two nations, locked in a war of survival, each sitting on the same simple trick, each paralyzed by the same fear. It was Churchill who finally broke the deadlock on the 23rd of July, 1943. The losses were unsustainable. Window would fly tomorrow night. The target was Hamburg. The crews were briefed that afternoon. Each man received a stopwatch. The instructions were precise. Drop one bundle through the flare chute every 60 seconds. Start at the designated point on the approach. Don't rush. Don't fall behind. The timing mattered. At 1 o'clock in the morning on the 24th of July, the first bombers crossed the German coast. And as they approached Hamburg's defenses, 2,000 strips of aluminium-coated paper tumbled from each aircraft every 60 seconds, spinning and fluttering into the darkness below. The effect was instant. On the ground, the Würzburg radar screens dissolved into chaos. Where moments earlier there had been a few dozen trackable dots, now there were thousands, tens of thousands. The entire display was a blizzard of false returns. Every single strip of paper was a ghost bomber, and the radar could not tell the difference between paper and a 4-engine Lancaster. The searchlights, which normally locked onto aircraft with deadly accuracy, swept the sky aimlessly, finding nothing. The anti-aircraft guns, dependent on radar for targeting data, either fired blindly or fell silent entirely. The night fighters, already airborne and waiting for intercept vectors from ground controllers, received nothing useful. Their controllers were staring at screens that showed bombers everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The fighters' own onboard radar was equally swamped. Pilots flew through clouds of slowly falling aluminium, their instruments screaming with contacts that vanished when pursued. 791 bombers dropped 2,300 tons of bombs on Hamburg that night. 12 were lost, 1.5%. On any previous raid of this size against a target this heavily defended, the expected losses would have been between 40 and 60 aircraft. Between 280 and 420 men who would never have come home, Window saved them. What happened to Hamburg over the following nights was devastating. 3 more major raids followed within a week. The combination of concentrated incendiary bombing, unusually dry summer weather, and the near-total collapse of radar-guided defense created a firestorm on the night of July 27th. Temperatures at the center exceeded 1,000 degrees. Winds of 150 miles per hour were sucked into the inferno. Over 40,000 civilians died in what some later called the Hiroshima of Germany. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, later said the raids made an extraordinary impression on the Nazi leadership. He told Hitler that if the Allies repeated this on 4 or 5 more cities, it could end the war. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The Germans scrambled to adapt. The Kammhuber Line, the grid defense that had been systematically destroying Bomber Command for 2 years, was rendered useless overnight. New tactics were improvised in desperation. Wild Sow, Wild Boar sent single-engine fighters to patrol visually over burning cities, hunting bombers by the glow of fires below. Zom Sow, Tame Boar, used longer-range radars less vulnerable to Window to guide fighters toward the bomber stream in general terms. New airborne radar sets were developed, operating on different frequencies, but they never fully recovered from that July night. An electronic arms race began over Hamburg, one that would accelerate through the rest of the war. Every British countermeasure prompted a German adaptation. Every German adaptation prompted a new British countermeasure. The age of electronic warfare had begun. The Germans deployed Duple, their own version, 6 weeks later during raids on Britain. It had limited effect. The Luftwaffe's bomber force was too small by then for the deception to be convincing at scale. The Americans adopted the concept with industrial enthusiasm, producing 13 million pounds of chaff. A single cardboard packet could produce a radar echo the size of a B-17 Flying Fortress. Crews nicknamed them dehydrated bombers. But the most extraordinary use of window wasn't over a burning city. It was over the English Channel, on the night that changed everything. June 5th, 1944. The eve of D-Day. As the real invasion fleet crossed toward Normandy, two ghost fleets crossed alongside it, heading for entirely different destinations. Operation Taxable used 8 Lancasters from 617 Squadron, the dam busters themselves, to create the radar image of a massive naval convoy approaching Cap Danifer, 80 kilometers from the actual landing beaches. Operation Glimmer used 6 Sterlings to simulate a second fleet heading for Pas-de-Calais. The bombers flew extraordinarily precise patterns, dropping window at 15-second intervals, each circuit moving the expanding cloud of chaff slightly closer to the French coast. On German radar, it looked exactly like a fleet of ships advancing at 8 knots. Below the aluminium clouds, small boats towed radar-reflecting balloons, broadcast fake radio traffic, and played recordings of anchor chains and ship engines through loudspeakers. The deception worked beyond anyone's expectations. German shore batteries opened fire on the Phantom fleets. A full invasion alert was issued for Calais. Motor torpedo boats were dispatched to intercept ships that did not exist. Resources and attention were pulled away from Normandy at the exact moment the real invasion was landing on the beaches. 6 hours after the Ghost Fleet operations had ended, with Allied troops already fighting and dying on the Normandy sand, German High Command was still logging references to the Phantom invasion force approaching Calais. Strips of paper, aluminium foil, dropped from aircraft in precise patterns over the black waters of the English Channel. And the German High Command saw an entire invasion fleet that was never there. Today, the principle Joan Curran demonstrated with kitchen scissors and household foil is standard equipment in every military on Earth. Modern chaff, made from metallized glass fibers, is carried by fighter jets, warships, and missile defense systems worldwide. Self-defense dispensers fire it automatically to defeat incoming radar-guided missiles. Every Navy, every Air Force, every missile system accounts for it. A few original window strips survive in museum collections. The Imperial War Museum in London, the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. They are thin and fragile, crumbling slightly with age. They look like nothing at all, but those strips rewrote the rules of air warfare in a single night. Before window, a bomber crew's survival depended on luck and the desperate prayer that radar would find someone else first. After window, the most sophisticated defense system in the world saw everything and understood nothing. 2,000 strips of paper per bundle, 27 centimeters long, 2 centimeters wide, each one a ghost, each one an aircraft that doesn't exist. Each one a target that can never be shot down because it was never there. That was the British trick. Not a bomb, not a bullet, not a weapon of destruction at all. Just ghosts, thousands upon thousands of ghosts, falling silently through the night sky, turning the enemy blind. Sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't the one that destroys. It's the one that deceives.